Welcome to Unity of Beaverton Sunday Celebration Service. My name is Reverend Kathy Condon, and I am so delighted to be here with you once again, coming to you from my living room and to whatever room you happen to be in. I hope you're all dressed really comfortably and, just feeling quite at home. Have a cup of coffee or tea or whatever it takes to, make you feel alive in the morning. We are continuing our services on Zoom until further notice. We don't know when that'll be and what it'll look like, but eventually we will try to get back to our beautiful sanctuary where we can actually all be together. Following this service, this message, we will open up a line so we can just really have a conversation, maybe about what I have to say in the message, and or maybe about what's going on in your life. I don't know if you all saw the weekly email that I sent out last night. You probably wouldn't have seen it till this morning, but in that I ask a question about how you are doing, and I hope that you have perhaps given that some thought and might be ready to talk about that when we finish up with the message here. I'd love to hear what's really going on with each of you, and if there is anything that is going on that you're feeling really uncomfortable, however it is, and you would like to speak one-on-one with me, you can call me on my personal phone, or send me an email at revkathy@unityofbeaverton.org and give me your phone number, and I will call you so that we can have a conversation and maybe get to the bottom of what is bothering you. So happy Sunday, happy August 2nd. And boy, August has just started off beautifully, hasn't it? I'm just really thrilled. Yesterday I had a wedding on the Washougal River, and it was gorgeous. It was just beautiful. The weather was absolutely perfect, and the sun was shining through the trees, so the light was dappled, and it was fabulous just to be there with this small group of people in celebration. So it's one of my very favorite things that I get to do is weddings. I really love any time we can get together with love as being the focus. And that is what I hope is the focus for you this morning. It is for me. It's, every week we find a different topic to discuss and uncover and, look through it and see what all in there applies to us. But the basis for every Sunday is love, that love truly is all that there is. And how do we come to a place in ourselves of experiencing that love? So let's get to this, and I will begin by reading our daily word. Compassion. I am kind and compassionate. Seeking to grow in compassion, I look to the example of Jesus. Gospel stories give many examples of Jesus showing compassion by demonstrating keen awareness of the needs and feelings of friends and strangers alike. I remember learning that Jesus did not turn away from social outcasts. He healed them and shared meals with them. His compassion fed a multitude and restored wine to a wedding reception. Upon learning that his dear friend had died, Jesus wept. Even when his disciples deserted him as he was crucified, Jesus asked God to forgive them. As I desire to grow in compassion, I know that my kind words and even simply by my loving presence provide comfort. Let's say that again. As I desire to grow in compassion, I know that my kind words and even my simply loving presence provide comfort. I listen deeply with my heart as well as with my ears. And today's quote is from Philippians 2:4, and it says, "Let each of you look not at your own interests, but to the interests of others." That's a tall order, to look through the interests of others rather than our own. And that's kind of a lot of what we are going to be discussing here today, because, it's a new month. And so this month, um, our, our theme is inclusion in action. Actually, I think that's the weeks, but inclusion in action is what we're going to be talking about. And I want to begin with an affirmation here. Consciousness reveals itself as inclusion in action and demonstrates our oneness. And I really like that quote. It is so simple. When we go within and our consciousness, talks to us, it shows us what we believe is real in this life and beyond. We get to see what we believe is real. And so that idea that inclusion is everywhere. Inclusion is everywhere, even as diversity is present. There is no end to the life forms that our universe knows. There's hardly any end to what our Earth knows as diversity in life. It is unending and continues, because everything continues to create out of itself, and there occurs evolution, and there occurs transformation and transmutation within us, so that we grow and change. And what comes next out of us, our cells, become changed. They become different than their predecessors, because they can be created in an environment of consciousness that is loving, consciousness that understands that there is only one life, but in this one life is so many. And we often, when we think about this, we often look at humans and think that humanity is what we are speaking of. But the entire earth shows us that within that unity, that is one life, is also every aspect of life that we can see, that we are aware of by means of science, and the scientists explaining to us about our internal way of being, that the understanding that our DNA was once thought to be the rule of who we would become, that nothing could be changed, that within that strand of all those DNA markers may have been leaning towards some kind of cancer or some kind of genetic disease or something along that line. But later, what was discovered was that it was not the DNA that was the ruler of how we would turn out, but it was the membrane that captured and held that DNA. And the membrane could decide what got into those cells and what did not. so that every time we had a loving thought, every time we experienced compassion for others, every time we said a prayer for peace and community, we changed that membrane, and what got into those cells that became, they were changed and uplifted and became more proactive in seeking out health and in becoming health and well-being. So inclusion is something that we want to incorporate into our very being. And the reason I brought all of that up, and will continue talking about that and our consciousness, is because the idea and what we think becomes who we are. Not fleeting thoughts, but those thoughts and those beliefs that are there and yet to be even recognized. Those unconscious beliefs that are within us, that rule our lives, that they are the things that hold us in a small container. We are held in this small container by our beliefs. But there is a way to break through that container, to escape that container and become something greater, something much greater. And so as we use our mindfulness to discover our beliefs, we can begin to call them into question. We can begin to undo them. So this is kind of an opening in how our central principle of oneness calls us together into a state of diversity, and how the fact of inclusion helps us live out this oneness. Oneness does not equal sameness. We see that everywhere. Unity does not mean uniformity. It means that we have one source. So what we know is divine intelligence, the source of all that is, manifests itself through and as each diverse form and individualization of itself, empowering expressions of imagination and creative power. Within us, we have both the imagination to close our eyes and go within and create a picture of how we want life to be. And then we have the creative power to bring it into being. We're just simply so immersed in the divine, and the divine is always inclusive of diversity. When we look around, we really see that. When we're including all of life, we're including all of humanity. When we are including all plant forms, animal forms, insects, it doesn't matter what we look at, it's the same. It's the same law of inclusive of diversity. So the confirmation of which, as I said, is self-evident. We naturally are inclusive when we are recognizing the diversity around us. That is exactly where we have the ability to go to, is to include all that is. That's very simple, you know, and the thing is again, as I've said a couple of times in the last few weeks, you need to look at that from a distance, to step back and see that diversity all around you, and use your knowing mind, your heart, to recognize that diversity is through everything. And each of us may have our preferences, but we're still unified in one source. And therefore, the inclusion is who we are. It is the essence of our very being. So what we want to look at here is to examine our beliefs from the stance of self-observation. Self-observation helps us to become more aware of thoughts and ideas that do not serve us and they don't serve others. It allows for transformation of your consciousness, and that reveals itself through this inclusion as action, and then demonstrates the oneness. So let's see, inclusion, and no, that's not what I wanted. So what we need to pay attention to is our unconscious prejudice or our unconscious bias. And what that means, unconscious biases are learned stereotypes that are automatic, unintentional, and deeply ingrained. They're universal and able to influence our behavior. So I want you to think of a rose, and you can pick any rose you like, anything at all, just bring it to mind. And roses have things in common. They have in common that there's typically thorns, although I understand there's roses without thorns. There is a bloom with, all the petals. They're pretty much shaped in the same way. The variety of colors is phenomenal. But what else is really phenomenal is the variety of the scent of the rose. I don't think I ever see a rose that I don't go over and sniff it to see if it has a fragrance. Now, some roses you get within 5 feet of them, and the fragrance just washes over you. And others, you're right up close, and there may be nothing or just a hint. It is no less a rose because it is different. And the one that has the greatest fragrance and the one that has the least fragrance is no less a rose. We may have preferences in there, but it's still all a rose, and we can recognize that very simple thing as diversity. So what we have to watch for, as I said, is this unconscious bias, and how that comes to be is the experiences and illuminations. This is a quote, by the way, by Arthur Schopenhauer. He says, the experiences and illuminations of childhood and early youth become in later life the types, standards, and patterns of all subsequent knowledge and experience, or as it were, the categories according to which all things are classified, not always consciously, however, and how not let me do that again, not always consciously, however. And so it is that our childhood years, with as well of its superficiality of depth, it will be in later years unfolded and fulfilled, not essentially changed. So let's go back to our example of the rose. When I sniff that rose that has this special fragrance, and then I sniff that rose, do I somehow make that rose less of a rose in my mind? Well, that's okay. It's not that great. It had no fragrance whatsoever. And so it's easy to judge the roses based on what we think they are and how we think they should be. So we can use our mindfulness right there, just right there, to become the observer of our thoughts, separating from the implicit bias, right? The unconscious prejudice that we may be embodying, exploring and allowing the habituated ideas to be informed by the divine, and allowing that awareness of inclusion to be the natural expression of self, the natural expression of where we go to, releasing what does not serve the greater good. It's very difficult for many of us as we age to accept the younger generation. And it always kind of makes me chuckle, because there has never, ever, ever been a generation that did not think the one coming up behind it was lost, just the lost generation. They know nothing. Oh my God. I heard it from my parents. My parents were terrible about that. Our music wasn't any good. And oh my God, what happened during the Vietnam War, whew, when young people were out protesting, my parents hadn't yet caught up with the idea of what was happening in Vietnam and what was happening in our country. They still were controlled by their beliefs that the government was always right, that you could disagree with this act or disagree with that act. But boy, when we were called to war, they were the greatest generation, as Tom Hanks called them. So I watched that. I watched it, and I promised myself I would never go there. And so when my children were growing up, what I discovered was how bright they were. I attempted to listen to their music, but there is something that happens as we age. We just can't go there. And those biases won out. I would hardly even, and actually, it was years later, in the 90s, that I really took to a lot of the music. I loved much of the music of Guns N' Roses and Queen and so many other groups that I wouldn't even listen to. And my kids introduced me, my son made me so many tapes of groups, and the music that he chose for me was amazing. So I already had this somewhat open mind, because I had promised myself I would not ridicule every single thing young people did just because they were young. I didn't assume it was wrong or bad or this horrible mistake because they were young and they were making different choices. What I believe I have seen in this past 30 years is amazing. The youth of my generation, those that were my children, and in that generation, I watched them as parents, and I'm blown away. And now I'm watching the next generation, and they are also wonderful parents. They know more than what their parents did. This is a huge discovery that if we can find one thing to appreciate in younger people, we will become so much more youthful. We will become open and awake and aware. Eckhart Tolle says, be aware that what you think to a large extent creates the emotions that you feel. There is a link between your thinking and your emotions. Rather than being your thoughts and emotions, be the awareness behind them. And allow, now this is me speaking, and as you do that, allow for new information to enter. So what we can do is we can set an intention to be inclusive in all of our actions. And we can provide opportunities to be inclusive as we place a demand upon the law that is fulfilled in mind. So if I place a demand upon the law in my life to see diversity as something beautiful, as something life enhancing, it is a challenge for me to open myself to something that is different than I have thought before. There is nothing that will keep you younger than being open to new ideas, to truly contemplating anything that is new and seeing how it fits with you, and let go of those biases, let go of those prejudices. Let the perceptions or filters with which you are familiar be set aside as this self-observation is applied. Learning something new, it takes practice. Inclusion takes practice. So we have a call to action. Our call to action is the intention to be inclusive. It is the focus on opportunities to do so, knowing that which you resonate is revealed through the law of mind action. So if you are angry, that is what is revealed to you, through you, in the law of mind. And it is absolutely what you will experience. So make an effort to amalgamate. I almost said it. Amalgamate. Make an effort to amalgamate active listening, conscious communication, and therefore become comfortable with being uncomfortable. Being comfortable with being uncomfortable to fulfill the intention to put inclusion in action. To be receptive and open to change. To allow for a change in your thinking through awareness that you have had this same thought all of your life, and where did you get it? Who gave that idea to you? How did you come upon it? And are you ready to question it? Are you ready to question your thinking? There is nothing that will serve you more than asking a thought who its father is. Where did it come from? If it was a divine, inspiring thought, that will be revealed to you. So you never need to be afraid to ask that question. Just even if at the end of this questioning, even at the end of this looking within, you come up with the same conclusions, that's great. But there's going to always be something new that you haven't yet known when you start this process. And you won't find it without taking the steps to follow through this progress. So here's another quote for us. The idea of the oneness of God is not a philosophy of absorption or annihilism. We do not become absorbed in the universal self to the loss of individuality. The idea of oneness is not a philosophy of absorption We do not become absorbed in the universal self to the loss of our individuality. That individuality is so important, that you are unique is so valuable. It is your worth. So it's quite the opposite. We find ourselves not absorbed, but immersed in a universality, each one being unique, individual, and different manifestation of that which itself is one, undivided, indivisible, and whole. We cannot think of the spirit as static, but as forever unfolding its divine nature. And we know that must be true. Let's think about what informs us of that. We cannot think of spirit as static because it's energy. Energy is never static. Energy never stops and it never dies. It changes, it transforms, it comes in as something else, but it's still energy. It is those waves that they talk about in quantum physics, right? The waves is the energy. And when it finds a form to begin with, it becomes a particle. And it is that particle for whatever length of time and then becomes that energy again, pure energy. Unity does not mean uniformity. Unity means inclusiveness, diversity, all under one umbrella. So this more kind of completes us, you know, this is that idea of change that is not for change's sake, but is for becoming that which we are meant to be, becoming the very best of anything that we can be. And we can be the best of ourselves in so many different areas. We don't want to be limited to one piece of the pie. We want to be talented and gifted in so many areas, and that requires our oneness. It requires our understanding that we are one now and always, regardless of the transformations and transmutations that we may go through. Namaste. I'm so glad that you were all here. I want to make a special thank you to each of you who are continuing to support Unity of Beaverton. I have to say that I am pretty amazed with the generosity of your gifts and appreciate so much. On behalf of the board, I want to thank you for keeping our community alive as we go forward and move on to whatever is next. And let us be ready for that. Let's not go back to the same old, right? Let's use this time to regenerate, to recreate, to become that something new on the horizon that is coming into being and fulfilling the promise of Unity of Beaverton. Thank you so much. Have a very blessed day.